Strontium. I like strontium. A lot of people are afraid of strontium because they think it will kill your tank if you add it. It is toxic to corals. But again, if we look at Mother Nature is always consistently fighting for space, and that tends to make them grow faster. They're fighting for survival. I don't know enough about strontium to say if you add strontium that it will definitely kill your tank at a certain number. I've never raised it high enough or allowed myself to raise it high enough to get it to basically wipe out a tank. I try to keep it in the 9 parts per million to 20 parts per million range. After that, you really want to be testing it heavily. At 20 parts to 30 parts, I've tried both. I didn't see a big difference between 20 to 30 parts. Because it is toxic, yes, you can overdose things. Natural seawater is 9 parts per million, so at 20 parts, you're already doubling. Be responsible. Test if you're going to use it. Generally, tanks that have a lot of coralline algae, and if you're not dosing strontium, don't be shocked if it's at 0. Coralline algae will suck the living daylights out of strontium. Strontium test kits basically are very difficult to use, so if you're not one who likes to get involved with the chemistry, you may want to, stay away from it. Okay, now we know that we need these things. How can we bring them to our tank? First picture, that is a calcium reactor. Second picture, you can deliver it through Kalkwasser, and this is a Nielsen reactor. And the third picture is a doser for using for additives, or you can directly add the additives to your tank. You don't necessarily have to spend the money on a doser. Alkalinity. Again, I don't want to be biased, so I decided to show you another additive. No, I don't want you to go out there and think you can use this for your alkalinity. It is a joke. But using the additive for yourself, it does help sometimes to sit back and relax, drink a couple, not all of them. The next for delivering alkalinity, here's a basic drip system that you can use, and that is used for Kalkwasser. Here we go. All right, maybe I'm a little biased to one. Magnesium additives generally are going to be your best for raising magnesium. Calcium reactors will deliver some, but remember, sometimes you're going to have to readjust for that salt. Additives, for the most part, because of how high we need to raise it up, are usually what most people use. Strontium. In crushed coral, if you look at a bag of carob seed, they'll give you the readings. Strontium is in there, so you will get strontium if you use coral rubble in a calcium reactor. No, it's not going to jack your strontium up. If you want to be that guy who wants to get that higher growth and use the strontium, you're probably going to have to go to an additive. As you can see here, I did pick another beer to show. Calcium reactors, benefit, low cost and time. If you have a big tank, that's probably what you most likely want to choose and use, except for if you don't like to test often in the beginning or very good mechanically, because there are adjustments that are going to have to be made, and it's always going to be in the beginning. It may take you even up to a month to adjust a calcium reactor, and that is because you want to do it slow. You do not want to slam this thing on that's delivering CO2 that's hooked up to your tank and then blow a bunch of CO2 in your tank. If you use this, make sure you have a shut-off solenoid. When I started playing around with calcium reactors, I did not have a shut-off solenoid for when the power went off or when there was a regulator failure. I had a regulator failure and I had about 2 pounds of CO2 dump into my tank. I did lose things. It was very milky in that tank. There are alkalinity issues with calcium reactors. Someone I know who did nothing but use a calcium reactor, it did fine. In time, he had a wipeout. He tested for alkalinity, and basically it was extremely low. Dangerous to the point where he wiped out a bunch of corals in his tank. No big deal. One of the issues is because of the residual CO2 that comes from a calcium reactor. Kalkwasser is your buddy to fix that. The way Kalkwasser works is it works with CO2, which is a benefit, so you end up with oxygen and calcium carbonate. So if you're going to use this, Kalkwasser is something that I would recommend using with it. There are problems with magnesium additions, again, like I said before, because sometimes you have to adjust your salts. Don't expect this to basically fix a salt issue or the fact that you want to drive up your magnesium. Kalkwasser, very inexpensive, is the first thing that I would recommend for you to get into, only if you have a low coral load. And of course, I also recommend for you to have a low coral load when you're first starting off, so you can learn the system, learn how things work, learn your testing. There's a little bit more testing that is required with Kalkwasser because you can drip it too fast. If you start dripping it too fast, you will start depleting your alkalinity and therefore throw off your ionic balance. If you dump it in all at once, you will jack your pH and affect your calcium immediately. Your tank can end up turning murky, and that is one thing when people mix up salts. They say, why is it a little bit cloudy? That is because the calcium and alkalinity are fighting to balance each system out. There's more testing that you will need to do with a higher coral load. Since we like to jam as many things as we can in our tanks, Kalkwasser will get to a point where it will not keep up with your system. It does not add magnesium, so remember, if that is something that you decide to use as your choice, you're probably going to have to add magnesium again because of salts. And again, I hate to keep bashing the salts. They do that so that we can afford it. A lot of aquarists complain about cost. That is one way they do tend to cut cost. No big deal. Pick up a bottle and add it before it goes into your system. Additives. Additives can be bought as separates. The cost really isn't too bad because they keep very high concentrations generally in the bottle, so it only takes a small amount in milliliters to raise your calcium, your alkalinity, your magnesium, your strontium up. Needs to be tested a little bit more often. People like to dump. Sometimes people don't like to measure what they dumped in. You do want to test often to know that where your balance is on that tank. It does take more testing in the beginning, but once you learn that company's brand's mixture to your system and your inhabitants, then you won't have to test as much. Next would be 2 parts. 2 parts are expensive. You have to remember they're trying to jam as many elements into a bottle as possible. There's also 2 bottles that are required, so it's double the amount of cost of labor, chemicals, and a lot. So it is expensive, but it is very convenient. There's lower tested needed due to the fact that the balance has been figured out for you. I still recommend that you do test it. Do not think that because you have a balanced system that either you can underdose or overdose. It's less likely to overdose, but it's more likely that it can be underdosed. Because people test, they think, okay, everything's right, I've put in a certain milliliter of each, everything's good. 6 months down the road, when the corals are getting bigger and bigger and turning all that liquid into a solid, they forget. They need to add more to bring up their levels to feed that monster that they just started to grow. Also, it starts taking out more and more space, so there's less and less water available. So yes, do testing. Some magnesium may be added. It really depends on the company brand, whether they add magnesium or not, or how much they do add. Some will add it up to the rate of calcification, which that's as high as I would recommend at all to be in a separate system, so that that guy who bought that salt where it already comes up to 1450 parts per million doesn't end up jacking up their magnesium and crashing their tank, because too much of anything can be a problem. Also, for the fact that, again, the salts, some of them are low, but just do that testing. Now that I've given you all this information, one is not best for every aquarist. Choose what is best for you. I cannot tell you calcium reactors from everybody. That guy who has that 10-gallon tank may not want to try to hook up a system that may be larger than the water volume that he originally